In Dark Souls, you play as a character called the Chosen Undead, who must choose between either linking the first flame, which means that the Age of Gods continues, or you can choose to leave it all behind, meaning that the Age of Dark comes to pass. While it sounds a little spooky, the Age of Dark is really just the Age of Humanity, meaning that people will rule the world, not gods. When you're playing the game, or at least when I'm playing, I don't really think about this choice too much just because it doesn't matter that much gameplay-wise. You make the choice at the very end of the game, watch a cutscene, and then it throws you back into the first level in case you want to play through the game again, and of course you do. What I find really interesting about the endings, though, is how they connect to Nietzsche's idea about the death of God. Simply put, in the late 1800s, Friedrich Nietzsche believed that the spread of rationality and a failing faith in religion would cause problems for modern people. While it's a gross understatement to say that Nietzsche wasn't the biggest fan of Christianity, he did note that it gave people direction. It gave them meaning and let them persist through tough times in their lives. It gave them purpose and a reason to live. So, Nietzsche's fear was that because people were leaving their religions behind in favor of a secular worldview, they would leave behind their sense of meaning as well. He feared that people would become nihilistic, and because they had given up their god without getting a new one, he feared that they wouldn't have any reason to keep going. According to him, the solution to not having any God-given meaning is to just be strong enough to create and make your own meaning. I think the parallels between Nietzsche's ideas and the endings of Dark Souls are pretty clear. In Dark Souls, you have to choose between either extending the Age of Gods or bringing about the Age of Man in the form of life without gods. And according to Nietzsche, in the real world, you can choose to either live your life dedicated to a god or higher power of some sort, or you can reject it and carve out some kind of meaning for yourself. What I think is really interesting about all this is how the game itself has affected the real world, and in the absence of a socially agreed upon meaning for life, the game has become the meaning for some people's lives. I'm not gonna lie, it sounds kind of crazy to say that people live for a game, but I think in a weird kind of way, that's the state of modern life for a lot of people. While everyone's situation is different, I think it's fair to say that life just feels difficult nowadays. I don't claim that life is harder now than it was 10 or 20 or 100 years ago, because I think it's harder in some ways and easier in others, but it feels like younger generations have this persistent sense of frustration with modern life because there are so many things that are just so far from ideal. How many people have worked for years to afford a home simply to have it always out of reach due to the crazy housing market? Or how many people, like me, are in thousands and thousands of dollars of student loan debt? Things like buying a house or earning a degree have given millions of people goals to work towards, but when that crumbles before your eyes, what are you supposed to do? Dark Souls can provide a virtual escape, but that's not entirely unique to this game. I think it does more than that by providing people with a sense of direction and a sense of progress. Like I said, you play as someone who has to choose between continuing the Age of Gods or beginning the Age of Man, but before you can do that, you have to kill the final boss. And before you kill the final boss, you have to kill these 4 lords. And before you kill these 4 lords, you have to ring a couple bells, but before you can do that, you have to find armor and upgrade and beef up and do whatever else you have to. You have to prepare. My point is that in this game, you always have a goal, and even better, you have some options that you can use to tackle it. You can be a knight or a sorcerer or a pyromancer, and while the game is easier with some builds than others, you know that unless you really screw up, you'll be able to beat the bosses and win the game. And even if you do screw up, you can summon a friend or a random stranger or an NPC, and they'll help you take it out. And when you win, it feels good. It feels satisfying. It feels satisfying in a way that a game shouldn't. The game has a reputation for being hard, and after you've beaten the game with a pizza controller and you know the final boss's attack pattern like the back of your hand, you might say it's easy, but when you first play, you die a lot. So, when you don't die, and more than that, when you actually win and beat something, it feels good. There are very few games that give you this strong satisfaction, so as you progress through the game, it feels like you're actually doing something, like you've accomplished something difficult. What I'm trying to say is that this game gives you a goal, it gives you resources to complete said goal, and maybe more than any other game out there, Dark Souls makes you feel proud of yourself for having accomplished your goal. So, let's look at real life again for a moment. How many people have spent time and money to get degrees only to find out that there isn't a job for them? How many times have you heard about people putting years of love, energy, and time into relationships just for them to fall apart? Or how many people have become incredibly skilled and proficient at something and have been fortunate enough to get a job only to be treated awfully and get paid pennies compared to how much their work is actually worth? Ironically, the game industry is wildly guilty of this. I think that so often people strive and work towards their goals only to find that they can't actually reach them, or they get exactly what they've always wanted and find that they're still unsatisfied and just there's still something missing. But with games, on the other hand, you know exactly what you're getting. Games are safe in that way. Dark Souls is safe. It might be challenging, but unlike real life, you know you can win, and you know there's a point to what you're doing. Now, I want to make it clear, no one sits down and says, I'm unhappy with the way my life is going, so I'm going to live out my fantasies in a video game. But there are times when it's really easy to fall into the nihilism that Nietzsche warned us of. If you don't have a kind of overarching sense of meaning in your life, and you're just not happy with your relationships or your job or your car or your family, or you're struggling with all of the above, it makes sense that you'd fall head over heels for something like this. Dark Souls is a phenomenal game after all, one of the best ever. It even won the award for Ultimate Game of All Time, which still sounds like a fake award to me, but to be honest, it deserves it probably more than anything else. Dark Souls is by no means the only game that has had this kind of effect on people. There are instances of people literally dying from playing games too long, but Dark Souls is the game that made me recognize this kind of behavior in myself. To make a long story short, this past winter, in the time between school semesters, I got really sick twice within a single month, so I just played Dark Souls the whole entire time. To be honest, I had pretty excellent reasons for just playing games. I was obviously sick and I couldn't do anything productive, so I might as well just play games, right? But at some point, after having beaten the game several times in a row, I realized that as I kept on playing through the game, I wasn't even having fun. There were several times when I uninstalled the game and swore it off completely, only to re-download it again. During this period, it felt like I lived and breathed solely for the game. It was all I could think about. Even though I had a billion worries on my mind, all I could think was, what bosses can I beat today? And I didn't realize it at first, but I was using the game as a way to mask some problems that I needed to deal with. Like I said, no one ever makes a conscious choice to run away from their problems through a game. But if you're in this kind of situation, then your thought process is muddled by the negative feelings that cause you to indulge in this behavior in the first place, so you can't even see what's happening to you. One thing I find so interesting is that so many people seem to have the exact opposite experience with this game, citing it as the reason why they were able to cope with awful depression. I want to make it clear that I'm happy for these people who were able to use Dark Souls in this way, and I wish them nothing but the absolute best. I've tried to make it clear that I love Dark Souls, and I continue to call myself a fan of the series, but I just think it's so easy to fall into a nihilistic stupor and just play the game all freaking day. Now, games aren't evil, you know, just like books or rock music. But I think whether or not something is a good influence or a bad influence is largely a matter of what the user brings to the experience. Games aren't evil, but they can so easily be used as a negative coping mechanism to deal with the problems of the world. I think the problem with this is that there isn't much awareness or understanding regarding games, because this is a fairly new phenomenon. Realistically, only a couple generations have had access to games, and paired with the incredible high-speed internet access we have and smartphone technology, we lead lives and struggle with problems that couldn't have even been imagined a few years ago. People don't understand that games can be used as a distraction from your problems just because they appear fun and are portrayed as nothing but enjoyable. But of course the problem is that as great as games are, and as great as Dark Souls is, ultimately whether or not you choose to link the first flame or turn your back on it, it doesn't matter because it's not real. Well, you have no clue how things will transpire in the real world. It must be better than a million fake worlds. If you're hiding in games to cover up a sense of loneliness or some other negative, unsavory emotion, at some point you have to realize that while the virtual worlds can be a fantastic numbing agent for a bit, the real world problems will only get worse and worse if you don't engage with them. And it's so difficult to do that, to try to unravel the complex combination of behaviors and challenges that land you in a position like this. But I know firsthand that if you take one step, then the next one becomes easier. While challenges can seem insurmountable, it gets easier to deal with them as you progress. One of the reasons why gaming can be so addictive, like I previously discussed, is because you get a sense of forward momentum. You can see that your character improves as the amount of damage they do increases, or through realizing they can perform new spells that they weren't able to in the beginning. But I think you can get some of those same feelings in real life too. In order for me to escape this weird little gaming vortex I found myself in, I had to force myself to do tasks that I'd wanted to do before my break had started. Even if I wouldn't be able to finish them, starting was good enough. So I had to stay away from my computer and bring myself to read and write and work out and make plans with friends and go to sleep on time and eat healthy and see a doctor and do all these things that were kind of small at the time but added up to be something much bigger. I've become more conscious of the fact that we as people often mask negative feelings with distractions instead of dealing directly with them. Even though my experience involves a 10-year-old fantasy game, I think that probably close to everyone in this internet age has had an experience like mine, even if their quote-unquote drug of choice is something completely different, like a social media app or just browsing the internet. I don't mean to sound like an old man yelling at a cloud, but I think it's necessary to ask ourselves why we do the things we do. Are we really having fun, or is the thing that we call fun simply a moment for getting the seemingly omnipresent bad feelings? To be quite honest, I don't think we can entirely escape this. I think that the occasional over-reliance on technology might just be the price we pay for its benefits. And as you struggle to find meaning in your own life, I think that there are times when you're just going to run into gaps where it feels like everything sucks, basically. No one's happy 100% of the time. That's just the way life is, unfortunately. Now, I don't think that the solution to all this is to burn all computers and go back to the Stone Age or anything like that, but I think that we just have to be conscious of what we're doing, which can be shockingly difficult. At the end of the day, a game like Dark Souls is dangerous because it's so much more stimulating and satisfying than real life, at least in the short term. And for someone like me, I think that can be dangerous because life is only made up of the short term. We only have the present to act in. I don't think many people would freely admit that their only reason for getting up today was to play a game or something like that. But I think that whether or not we realize it, we so often think like that. How often do we tell ourselves that all we have to do is get through this shift or get through this class and then we can actually go do something fun, whatever that may be? I think that if we're not careful, then little by little a false reality can become the only reality there is that matters to us. The real world sucks and it can be so frustrating, and so it's easy to turn our backs on it and to feel like we're not going to succeed, and so why even bother? Why not just sink lower and lower into this game? I know I probably sound like I think these games are evil, but I really don't. I love these games, and that's why I'm talking about this. Let me put it like this. These games are so good that they can end up meaning everything to a person. But if you're like me and you feel like you've overstayed your welcome in Dark Souls, then the real world, as frustrating and depressing as it can be, is there awaiting your best efforts with open arms, and really, I just hope it all works out for the best.